You will always defeat the screen if you're telling stories about your life that are going to mean something to the kids. One of my favorite things about storytelling is the idea that as a storyteller, my kids are now moving forward, knowing me in a way that is important to me. And, if I'm not around someday, they will still carry those stories in their hearts and their minds. I think that's really important.
My Nana, my mom's mom, she would just have this way of, at the most random times, you thought she was just quietly sitting there, maybe even spacing out or something, and she would just lay a story on you that would just, blow you away.
Photos are great, but pretty soon they lose context and they just become images without stories.
All right, Matt, hi, welcome, and thank you for doing this.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
I've wanted to talk to you for a while because I've been a fan for a while. I really love the Moth, and I know your work there, and I've watched most of your YouTube videos, and I recommend those to parents. I was just sharing with my partner, This Is Gonna Suck, because she hadn't, which is one of the classics there, one of the great ones. And then I was overseas in Japan, and I was really thinking about storytelling and how I wanted to relaunch my YouTube channel. And I came across your book, Storyworthy, and I actually listened to it first on audio as I walked around Osaka searching out my nightly Japanese feasts. And I listened to it, and I was just getting so into it. And then you and I had the occasion to speak when I was over there in Omihachiman, Japan. And shortly after that, I took your Storytelling for Parents workshop. And from that, I wanted to talk to you. So I really appreciate you doing this and sharing this work with the parents in my audience.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I think it's an important thing, and I'm happy to talk about it whenever someone wants to.
Great. So I was wondering if we can just start with you sharing a little bit about your background as a storyteller and why you specifically decided to do some work focusing on storytelling for parents.
Sure. Well, I fell into storytelling about, 14 years ago now, on a whim, really. Some friends told me that I could tell a good story and that I had a lot of terrible things that have happened in my life, so I would have lots to say. That's not true. You don't need that at all. They were incorrect in that regard. But they said, go to New York and tell a story for the Moth, which at that time was sort of a New York-based storytelling competition. And so I agreed to go tell one story and never do it again. And I told my one story and I won that competition. And more importantly, I fell in love immediately with the idea of standing on stages and sharing bits of my life with people. I was already publishing novels and writing books and writing columns. So it was an extension of my voice, in a way that lifted it off the page and gave me sort of immediate feedback that you don't get when you write a novel. You sort of write your novel and send it into the world. And occasionally you see it in the wild, but that's the end of it. So I love the idea of connecting with audiences and getting that immediate reaction to what I was saying. And so I've been working on storytelling with, lots of folks over the years. I work with a lot of corporate, entities and a lot of religious people and priests and ministers and rabbis and Olympic athletes and, people who have summited Mount Everest. Everyone seems to be able to use storytelling, and I think that's very true. But as a parent of two kids and as a teacher for 25 years now, I've been an elementary school teacher, I quickly realized how valuable storytelling could be for your ability to connect and communicate and motivate and convince children, that there's better ways to live and there's good ways to sort of make better choices and it's okay to make mistakes. All of those kinds of things that come through your willingness to share of yourself and then teaching kids how to do the same in return.
Right. So that leads me to, I watched the workshop and I really, really loved it. I'm going to leave a link below for parents who want to check that out at the end. But what do you think are the main benefits really for parents of learning to be storytellers with their kids?
Well, I think there's a few. My favorite, or one of my favorites, is that my kids know my stories more than most parents because I am a storyteller and I'm constantly telling them. We had dinner tonight and I told them a new story. I said, hey, had I ever told you about this? And they said, no. And so they got a brand new story. And that happens all the time. My mom passed away in 2007. And what I learned when she passed away is when your parent passes away, essentially the hard drive crashes. And every single memory contained within the brain and mind of my mother disappeared forever. And every question that I failed to ask will never now get answered. And everything she hoped to share one day or forgot to share with me is now lost forever. And that happens all the time. And so, one of my favorite things about storytelling is the idea that as a storyteller, my kids are now moving forward, knowing me in a way that is important to me. And, if I'm not around someday, they will still carry those stories in their hearts and their minds. I think that's really important. On top of that, I know that as a storyteller, as a person who's willing to share his life with his kids, all of my failures, all of my embarrassments, all of my shames, my kids feel better about sharing those things back with me. When I come home and I tell them about the ridiculous and stupid thing that I did while I was at the grocery store, at school or wherever I was, they're much more willing to say, well, here's the ridiculous and here's the stupid and here's the shameful thing that I did today as well. And that's true as a teacher with my students, and it's true with my children as well. So I know for sure that my kids share more with me than most kids share with parents. And it's not because I'm special in any way or that they're special in any way. It's just that we've cultivated an environment of rich storytelling in our home, and it happens all the time.
Yeah, I want to ask you more about that part. That really hits home with me. My father passed away about a year ago, and he was not a real warm guy. He wasn't, didn't talk a lot about stories growing up, but towards the end, they were just coming out, and I was like, wait, that happened? Wait, that, when I was a child, that happened, and you did what in Korea? And it was really valuable. And then I think before that, my Nana, my mom's mom, she would just have this way of, at the most random times, you thought she was just quietly sitting there, maybe even spacing out or something, and she would just lay a story on you that would just, blow you away, and I'm really so grateful for that of course, I'd want to pass that on, to my son. That point's really interesting to me. One of the things you said there, when I watched your workshop, and I shared this with you before, I went into it thinking, ooh, I loved storytelling with my son when he was growing up. And I saw how great it was for our relationship and for passing on things, maybe a message I wanted to share with him sometimes. I might say more about that later. But what I didn't see coming is when you talked about in the workshop how a lot of times there's reasons why kids don't want to share their lives with you or don't want to share their stories with you. And I wonder if you might say a little bit more about that.
Yeah, well, there's lots of reasons why. As a teacher, I especially learned it, and then I sort of had it reinforced when I became a parent. One of the things is oftentimes kids grow up in a culture where mistakes are not valued and embarrassments should be sort of tamped down as much as possible. And when you have an epic failure, you should try to keep it to yourself and sort of not broadcast it to the world. And none of those things are true. Anyone who is unwilling to speak about their failures, I mean, it's nothing really more than cowardice. It is the desire to portray an untrue version of yourself because you are afraid to portray the true version of yourself, which is what I try to tell my students all the time. So by sharing something with my kids or my students at school, it just opens doors and allows them to share back. The problem happens when we don't share of our lives, or when we hide our childhoods from our children, or we don't talk about the stupid things we did as teenagers or the stupid things we did yesterday. Kids learn that when you are silent, they should be silent. So if you're not speaking about your life and you're not speaking about your shames and embarrassments and foolhardiness, your kids will learn that those are not the things that we talk about. And soon you're sort of walking through life carrying baggage. You're encouraging your kids to pack up all of their problems in a suitcase and keep that suitcase closed and keep it under the bed. So we want to create an environment where kids feel safe to be able to do those things as much as possible.
Yeah. I'm a psychotherapist myself, in addition to doing the parenting work. And, one of the most insidious emotions that we work with is shame, and how there's so much shame out there. And sometimes shame just starts with little things when a kid is small and we expect them to do things they don't know how to do yet, or, and make them feel bad about it, even if we're not intending to, But you're also reflecting a positive model about how we can set a good example, a positive example of, we make mistakes and we do silly things. I haven't got to some of the teenage stories with my son, but maybe.
Yeah.
I'm wondering a little bit more about how you see storytelling being an opportunity to have an even stronger bond, with our children, and if there are any specific techniques or approaches that you recommend to parents to create meaningful connection through storytelling.
Sure. Yeah. I think that connection comes almost immediately when that exchange happens, that exchange back and forth between a child and a parent. My son, we were playing a game, actually. Here's a game that you can start playing with your kids right away. It's called 3-2-1. It's a game I invented for workshops that works great with kids too. Essentially, you get 3 prompts. Recently, with my son, I gave him the prompt blade of grass, window, and octopus. And that's the 3. What he has to do is choose one of those words, blade of grass, window, or octopus. He's choosing one. That's the 1 in 3-2-1. And he has to tell me a story. And that story can be about 2 minutes long or less, about one of those objects, a true story from his life involving an octopus, a window, or a blade of grass. And so the story he told me, he said, about 2 years ago, I was making a video using my iPad, and I wanted to get a shot of the outside, and there was snow, and I didn't want to put my clothes on. I had my pajamas on. So I was trying to shoot through the window, but there was a screen. So then I lifted up the screen to shoot it, but I couldn't get the screen back down, and I thought I had broken the screen. And for 2 weeks, I didn't want to tell you because I thought you were going to kill me for breaking the screen. So I panicked for 2 weeks over the screen. And then finally one day I thought to myself, maybe if I go to YouTube, I can figure out how to close the screen. And I did. Right? Now that happened 2 years ago, which means 2 years ago, for about 2 weeks, my son was spinning in fear that he had broken a piece of the house, right? Story I would have never, ever heard in my life about this period of time if I had not said, tell me a story about an octopus, a window, or a blade of grass. That's a game that I play with my kids all the time. It's a game we play in workshops. It's actually a game I now play in front of live audiences as part of an improv show. And without fail, you will be able to tell a story. It might not be entertaining, but I say if you can speak 20 seconds on something, that's meaningful. That means that you've shared 20 seconds of your life that you hadn't shared before. My favorite example of this is I know a woman who taught her son this game. And she told me, I used to drive my son around town and we'd listen to music and I really enjoyed the drives. But now he sits in the back seat and he just shouts 3 nouns at me. And I'm constantly having to tell him stories based upon one of the 3 nouns. And she says, it's really frustrating, but I've told my son more things that I never would have thought to tell him about my life thanks to this game. She said, I would prefer to be listening to music a lot of the time, but I recognize that my son now knows me in a way he never would have known me had I not cultivated this environment of storytelling in my car when we drive to soccer. So that's a simple game you can start playing with your kids, and it just unlocks their lives in ways that they either don't understand we want them to, or they don't feel like they have permission to. And so, you unlock that door, you open it up, and suddenly you discover things that are going on in their lives that you can't even begin to imagine.
That's great. Yeah. I actually, after learning about that from you, the 3-2-1 exercise, I was talking about storytelling to a client of mine, and he was convinced that, no, I don't know how to tell, and I don't know. And I started playing that game with him like once a week at the end of our sessions for a few weeks. And now he tells me that it's like a big hit in his home with his 3 different kids,
Yeah, it's wonderful. I don't recommend it for first dates. I've had some of my workshop people use it on a first date. It doesn't work there, but everywhere else it seems to work really well.
Yeah, that could be dangerous.
Yeah.
A lot of parents are asking me these days, and I was thinking about this, thinking about talking to you. I just shot a video about parenting in the digital age that I'm going to be putting up soon. And it's just one of my biggest questions I get from parents. A lot of times the story is, my kid's already hooked on screens. What do I do to put Pandora back in the box? Or how can we compete with this? Because everyone else is doing it. And this is so much fun. And I hear this a lot from parents. So I'm just wondering, in today's digital age with, screen time often being competition for family time, how do you see parents striking a balance between, the digital storytelling that's going on out there and all the social media and everything, and the art of storytelling in the family?
Sure. Well, first, I know this isn't going to be very helpful in any really meaningful way, but don't open the box is my first suggestion. I have a 14-year-old and an 11-year-old. Neither one owns a phone. They tell me they're the only ones in their schools that don't own phones, and they probably are correct, but I don't care. So don't open the box. Like, the fact that your child isn't going to be cool enough because they don't have a phone is the last thing you should be worried about. But if you've opened the box and kids are on screens, and my kids have an iPad, so they do spend time sort of on YouTube and places like that. If that's the case, the first thing I'll tell you is that you will always defeat the screen if you're telling stories about your life that are going to mean something to the kids. All I have to do is yell sort of like, kids, I'm going to tell you the story right now about the time I threw Derek Reynolds into the brook because he made me mad. All screens will be put off, and they will all come to me and they will hear a story. Not because I'm a master storyteller, but because I'm going to share something from my life. So you have to sort of gather those memories, gather your wool so that you have things to share. And playing 3, 2, 1 is one of them. I have an activity called Homework for Life. There's lots of ways that you can gather stories to share them, because you will defeat the screen every time if you're telling stories that really have meaning to the kids. The other thing I'd say is, if we're going to deal with screens anyway, try to make it a family affair. So, my family watches movies, but we watch movies together. The only exception is my wife and my son can't stand horror movies. So my daughter and I will sit down and watch a horror movie together. But otherwise, we watch our movies together and we talk about them. We talk about them after. We talk about the storytelling elements because we happen to be a family interested in how storytelling works. But they become part of our culture. When we went through the Harry Potter books, we read every book. And after every book, we watched every movie. And then we went to Broadway and we saw the Broadway show. And we went to the Harry Potter store. And this summer, we're going to go to Universal Studios. It became a family moment. It is not people going off to their separate corners and watching their own things. We're watching The Simpsons right now, the kids and I. And the rule is you cannot watch a new Simpsons unless all three of us are together, me and my 2 kids. You can go and rewatch Simpsons episodes. That is perfectly acceptable, but nobody moves forward unless we all move forward at the same time. Too often, I think what happens is the problem is not screens. The problem is it's individualized screen time where people are now separating themselves. So they're no longer gathering at the campfire or gathering, around the hearth anymore. They're gathering around individual campfires, and that is creating disconnect. Try to bring that world back together. So if you're going to watch something, you're going to watch it together.
Absolutely. I agree with your advice about Pandora's box and not opening the box. I know that's hard for parents to hear if they've already done it, right?
Right. Yes.
It's like what best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The best thing to do is not open the box. But I found the same thing in our home. My son went to a Waldorf school and they kind of had an agreement in the class every year. We're not going to do technology yet. Okay. And everyone's like, yeah, I know I can send my kid to your house. You can send your kid to my house, and they're going to be playing outside. They're going to be doing creative things. They're not, and the kids didn't care. The kids did not care about technology. And I absolutely believe, from an attachment perspective, which is the lens that I look at human relationship, parenting, couples, things, is that technology is like a second choice because I don't have my first choice. And my first choice would be human connection with somebody I love, like for all of us. But if I can't get that, I might, pick up my phone.
Right. 2 days ago, I had a student actually tell me, he said, just out of the blue, he said, we got punished last week, my brother and I, for something we did. And my mom's punishment was she actually turned the internet off in the house. So, just shut the internet down, at least for them. And he said, I've never had so much fun with my brother as I did. And he said, yesterday the internet got turned on and I stopped having fun with my brother. And I just thought, if you've opened the box, perhaps you can find a time when the box doesn't have to be open. So you can be one of those families that the internet gets turned off at 7:00 every night, or it gets turned off on Saturdays and Sundays, or whatever it needs to be. You certainly can take a step back and start making some parental adult decisions about your children who have brains that are not fully developed yet. and yet seem like monsters at times. You can certainly gain a little more control over them, and I believe in that so strongly.
Yeah, me too. I also shared with you before this interview that when my son was little, I just didn't see myself as a natural storyteller. I just didn't think I was spontaneous in the moment enough to come up with stories. And when I just tried and I came up with a set and a setting and a couple characters, it was Cody Coyote in our home. Cody Coyote was a character who lived in the hills near our house in Marin County. We were living there when he was little. And I would just start talking, and I would say something about Cody Coyote and his adventures. And like I said earlier, I might sneak in a little message that I know, something that was worrying him or something that was coming up, or, just a little bit of a theme. But it wasn't anything that heavy. It was just spontaneous. And I just found that my kid, when he was little, he just thought I was the best storyteller on earth.
Yeah.
It wasn't about 30 or 40 times winning the Moth StorySLAM. It was me, but I was his dad, and
Right.
So he loved the stories, and he'd be on the edge of his seat, and he just wanted to hear more. I'm wondering, what advice would you give to parents who don't really think of themselves as natural storytellers, that they're maybe not, gifted at it, and who may be hesitant to start telling stories to their kids?
Well, I'll say that if you're choosing true stories from your life, you're going to be successful right away because your kids genuinely want to know about you. It's much more interesting to find out I got brought home by the police, when I was 14, than some fictional character getting brought home by the police. So those stories are always going to resonate more, and kids love to hear stories again and again. So I have told the same stories from my life over and over to my kids, which makes me crazy because I get bored with them, but they want to hear them over and over. So telling stories about your own life is going to instantly enhance the experience. You should also know kids are terrible judges of quality stories. Just watch what they watch. Your child probably watched Paw Patrol at one point. I watched that show. Like, there's no explanation as to why these dogs have any funding for the work they do, and they're just constantly saving the same mayor on the same bridge. Like, this is terrible. And yet kids love it. So kids don't need a lot in order to be engaged in terms of being a storyteller. And then there's just simple tricks that you can do. The thing I tell most people is the easiest thing you can do to tell an excellent story is to start your story off with action and location. Tell your audience, whether it's your 5-year-old or 500 people, you tell them where you are and you're doing something right away. And that instantly activates imagination. The location sort of activates that imagination and starts a movie playing in their mind. And when you have the action to go along with the location, now something's happening. And you're not one of those storytellers that has to teach us 19 things about your hometown and your grandmother before something ever happens in the story, right? You launch the story into some kind of a place. And that is an odd but successful strategy in all of life, because it turns out if you're a person who is marginalized and has a hard time sort of commanding the attention of others, and that goes for basically anyone who doesn't look like me, any woman or person of color or member of the LGBTQ community, anyone who sort of has to deal with people like me who feel like we own every space we occupy. If you just start telling a story by saying, I was standing in 7-Eleven looking for a candy bar, it is oddly a signal to everyone in the area that you're telling a story. And it makes everyone get quiet. In the same way, if you turn on the television and there's a movie playing, everyone will turn to the TV and stop talking for a moment. It's an odd but very successful strategy, and it works with children too. All you have to do is say, all right, listen, kids, I was stirring eggs in the pan in the kitchen 2 days ago when this happened, right? And the kids are just going to be silent and listening to you. So try that. If you're a bad storyteller, you're probably not as bad as you think you are, but simply location and action will be an instant hit for you.
Great. Well, finally, Matt, I'm wondering if we can talk a little bit about homework for life. I know people are sometimes worried that they won't have ideas or they won't have enough stories, especially these stories you're talking about that are so special, that are actually about our lives, about our lives as a family. And I love this idea you have for storytellers about homework for life. I'm wondering if you can say a little bit more about that.
Sure. Well, I'll add first that it's for all human beings, whether you're a storyteller or not. I'd say if you're a hermit who's not talking to people, you should still be doing homework for life. It's just the acknowledgement that our lives are filled with more stories than we recognize because we live our lives in this tragic way where we throw our days away as if they're meaningless. We just toss them aside and make no attempt to remember anything that's happening on a day. Homework for Life rejects that notion. It says every day has something that made it different than any other day, and oftentimes it has many things that have made today different than any other day, and we need to hold on to those things. And so the method that I came up with in a desperate attempt to find more stories to tell on a stage, I simply at the end of the day ask myself, what's the most story-worthy moment from my day? What's the day that makes this day different than any others? The real prompt I always give myself is this. Someone has kidnapped my wife and family, and they won't give them back unless I tell a story from something that happened on this day. What would be the story that I would tell to attempt to entertain an audience? And then I write it down. I don't write the whole story down because that's crazy. That's a journaler. Those people, I know they exist in the world. They're very precious unicorns, but you should not try to be one. I simply use an Excel spreadsheet, and I have a 2-column spreadsheet, not very complicated. On the left side is the date, and then I stretch the right column across, and in that right column, I write what happened. So I don't give myself a lot of room to write, just enough to hold on to that memory. And my goal was to get about 12 new stories per year, 1 per month. But what happened for me and for thousands and thousands of people around the world who are doing it today, they discover their lives are filled with stories. That things happen to them all the time. People say things and they do things and they see the world in a new way and they feel something they've never felt before. And when you record them and when you start to look for them and you record them, you start to see more and more of them. And soon you discover you have more things to say than you have time to say them. So, I average about 7 Homework for Life moments per day now. But if I looked 5 years ago and did the math, 5 years ago, I averaged about 4 Homework for Life moments per day. It wasn't because 4 years ago my life was less interesting than it is today. I've just been continually refining that lens and recognizing things that are worth sharing. Sometimes as 10-minute moth stories, and sometimes as 30-second anecdotes that can just entertain my friends while I'm playing golf with them or driving in the car or at dinner with my family. So we have to stop throwing away our days. Time does not fly. Everyone talks about how time flies, and it doesn't really fly. What happens is it's unremembered. And if you choose not to remember your days, then time does fly by, because what is 365 days in a year suddenly becomes a handful of days you chose to remember, and the rest disappeared, so it felt like they didn't exist. But they do exist. We just don't treasure our memories the way we should. And once we do, we have a million things to say to our kids and to everyone around us. So I have kids doing it too. I've had students who have been doing it for 10 years now. They're now 20 years old. They're in college, and they write to me and they say, thank you so much. Because like when I was 10, you introduced me to Homework for Life, and now I'm 20. And from 10 to 20, all of those school years, they have a memory from every single day. And many of them have many memories from every single day. Can you imagine the value that is for them? And they're just going to have it for the rest of their lives because it's Homework for Life. You do it for the rest of your life. So there's a TED Talk on it if you want more information, and you can see my spreadsheet. Yeah. Just Google Homework for Life and you'll see my TED Talk and you can learn more about it.
Great. I'll actually link it down below in the description.
Great.
Yeah, we just moved recently and we were looking through old photo albums, like from my childhood, and I think of it kind of like that, but better, like the old pictures are wonderful, but the stories, what if we had a story for all of those days that we're seeing in the photo album, and what a gift we're doing for ourselves and for our kids.
And those pictures, they don't hold the words. My aunt just gave me a picture from when I was 9 years old. I'm sitting on a bench. I don't know where the bench is. I don't know what the occasion was. I don't know who took the photo. I know nothing except this is what I looked like when I was 9. It's lovely because I don't have a lot of photos from my childhood.
Right.
But there's really nothing attached to it. What I would really like to know is who took that picture? And where was I? And what was I doing on that day?
Exactly.
And where's that bench, Where,
exactly.
All of those things. So the photos are great, but pretty soon they lose context and they just become images without stories.
Yeah. Well, Matt, again, thank you so much for doing this. I know this is going to be so valuable to people who are able to watch it. And I recommend to people, check out Storyworthy. It's a great, great book. Also, there's an Audible version of it. And check out the Storytelling for Parents workshop. And I'm going to link that below too. It's not an affiliate thing. I actually attended it myself and as a paid customer and loved it and watched it twice. And I just really appreciate you and you taking the time today, Matt.
It's my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.